So my name is Marc. As Bärbel already said, I'm the owner and founder of this nice small animation studio in the most western part of Germany. It's called renderbaron, and a warm hello outside to the internet and to the spectators here, of course. So let's jump ahead and have a deep dive in Cinema 4D with underwater scenes for TV documentaries. And before we go to that, let's have a brief word on renderbaron. It's a studio for animation and design in Düsseldorf. I founded it myself back in 2001. And renderbaron is focused on visualization of scientific subjects, TV commercials, and visual effects. So let's have a look at the most recent demo reel 2015. Don't worry, it's still something good in there. Have a look, 3 minutes of the best and recent stuff from renderbaron. So this is it for the moment about renderbaron showreel. And let's go ahead to the subject of my presentation now. It's deep dive underwater scenes for TV documentaries. And the name deep dive does not only refer to underwater stuff, submarine stuff, stuff taking place beneath the sea, but also to the depth you're diving into Cinema 4D itself, because underwater scenes as 3D environments require a huge variety of skills and techniques to be applied. So maybe just sculpting for landscape details or creature details maybe. Then two procedural things, procedural landscaping that has something to do with noise shaders, irregularities, random patterns, this stuff. Or procedural animation of water surfaces. It's almost the same but with floating structures. Creature animation, particle animation, if you think of swarms of fish, flocks of whatever animals, and of course you have to do something with volumetric effects, foggy things, dynamic light, light moving around, a constant motion, a constant flow, because it's underwater. And of course, you have to deal with credible shading and lighting, as always. So today, I'm going to share with you guys here at the booth 2 projects. Both of them are for a second German television channel called ZDF, or ZDF. And the show we are talking about is called Terra X. It's a TV documentary show. And we are looking at 2 projects, When Life Learned to Fight. It's a brief look on sculpting. And Under the Spell of Sunlight is a full-grown, in-depth breakdown of the whole project. So let's jump ahead, and I will change to the QuickTime player. No, it's not active, so... Oh, just look at here. It's about the tiger shark's versatile teeth.
Die scharfe Schnittfläche schneidet sich in den Panzer und mit der gezackten Fläche lässt sich der Panzer aufsägen. Kein anderer Hai verfügt über eine vergleichbar gefährliche Waffe.
So this animation is about the teeth of the tiger shark with 2 sides, one knife-like side for cutting and one jagged saw-like side for sawing its victim, the shell of the turtle, obviously. And we have a look on sculpting here, the process of sculpting for the inside of the tiger shark's mouth. Because initially it was planned to have a very close start of the camera inside the mouth of the tiger shark. So we see every detail in the wrinkles, gills, whatever. It was dumped in the end, and we are beginning with some other camera perspective. But before we sculpted the inside of the tiger shark's mouth, of course we needed some inspiration and Googled for that guy and its scary inside. And you see all those gills and wrinkles and flashy stuff in here. And that is, per definition, something to be sculpted inside Cinema 4D. And you don't want to meet this guy in the dark, maybe. Not looking very nice, but something cool for sculpting. So let's jump into Cinema 4D live. And I will show you something, thank you, Ben, about sculpting. The process of sculpting is coming handy when you have a mesh that is suitable for animation, just like this mid-level resoluted tiger shark geometry. But you need more details, maybe at a certain area, to enhance geometry with certain details. And in that case, sculpting is just ideal. So this animation-suitable geometry isn't suitable for any details here at the inside of the mouth. So what sculpting does as a first step is add temporary or intermediate subdivisions to your mesh. And this is done by a process called subdivide. And if you hit that button several times, you get a mesh that is highly subdivided, and the subdivision itself is stored into this little guy, the sculpt tag. And that subdivision enables you to add details with the proper sculpting tools, and you see now the mesh isn't suitable for animation anymore, but it's suitable for sculpting process. So when you go on the inside of the mouth and choose a proper sculpting tool, then you can easily paint every monstrous, scary detail on the inside of the mouth you wish to have there. So, and what you also see is that all those tool actions are happening in a symmetrical way. You see that? I'm working on the right side, but the action is also happening on the left side. And this is because of an action, an option called Symmetry. You find it here. It's a symmetry. You can define how the symmetry takes place along this axis or the y-axis of the model. And in this case, I chose the x-axis. So if I deactivate that, all the action is happening just on one side, and with symmetry, of course, on both sides. So far, so good. You have sculpted all those details. You have subdivided the mesh. But what are we going to do about animation now? It's much too high subdivided. So there's a point in the sculpting menu that is called Bake Sculpt Object. And if you think of sculpting as a geometry deformation, you might think of maps representing such deformations by not really deforming geometry, but distracting the normals of a polygon. And these maps are called maybe bump maps, maybe normal maps, or even displacement maps for real render time deformation. And you can bake all this information, the subdivisions, the geometry, all this can be baked into one map called a displacement map. And the cool thing about that is you end up with something like this. Here you have the UV unwrapped mesh of the tiger shark with the fins, the gills, whatever. And here's the area for the inside of the mouth. And all those colored areas are the RGB Walt tangent information for the displacement. So this stuff is telling Cinema 4D where to deform the mid-resoluted animation-suitable mesh at render time into something sub-polygon displaced. So you keep your mid-level resoluted mesh like this. The mesh is looking like this, so that's animation suitable. It's cool for animation, it's not too heavy. But when rendered with the displacement map applied, you see that the real geometry deformation coming from our sculpting process is deforming the inside of the shark's mouth at render time, just as if there would be sculpting applied. And that's a cool thing, because it's slick for animation and it's looking cool for rendering. So this was a brief look on the principle of sculpting. And now let's head over to the next in-depth project, Under the Spell of Sunlight. It's about the absorption of light in terms of brightness and color shift deep beneath the sea. So let's watch that.
Doch Wasser absorbiert Licht. Energiearmes rotes Licht wird zuerst verschluckt. Nach 200 Metern ist alles in Blau getaucht. Plankton wird knapp, das Leben schwindet. Ab einem Kilometer ist es ganz finster und unwirtlich.
So this is the animation we're talking about in a detailed breakdown right now. And first of all, there was inspiration time. Of course, we needed some inspiration, some reference for the look and feel of the scene. And we Googled for tourist photos, basically, from underwater, and came up with a bunch of pictures depicting a typical underwater world. And what we see here is we're dealing with some foggy stuff, as you can see here. Lots of particles. We're dealing with a color shift to the more bluish, greenish part of the spectrum. We're dealing with lots of small fishes and lots of plants. This is what we came up with from this photo. Another one, the same style. Next thing is that you have a typical artifact of underwater photography or underwater cinematography. As long as you're not James Cameron, you're dealing with optical imperfections. Maybe some chromatic aberration, where at the edges of an image, all those colors are not perfectly aligned anymore and are aberrated. So this is an optical imperfection making a 3D rendering more analog but more credible, because it's not looking too perfect. And you see, it's adding a slight amount of typical look and feel, how colors are aberrated from each other. So this is one important thing we have to think about when doing underwater stuff. And if you look at the corals at the top right rim of the picture, you see that even more chromatic aberration or here. So that's typical. And of course, foggy stuff, volumetric effects, they're increasing with increasing depth. So we have to keep this in mind as well. Of course, we're dealing with swarms and color contrasts. When you have a look at all those foggy and particle stuff, all those plant stuff and rock stuff, it's all in the same color scheme of a bit bluish, desaturated color. And if you have a look at the fishes, they are highly saturated and have a good contrast to the surrounding. So another last thing is you want to take care about when dealing with plants underwater is an effect that is called subsurface scattering. And this effect ensures that light coming or hitting an object is scattered beneath its surface inside the volume. And this makes this coral looking so fleshy or gummy. Try that with a candle behind your ear. Don't get burned. So here we are with another color contrast. So okay, the first technique or skill we are approaching now is one of the noise-related things, procedural animation of water surfaces. Without any real flow stuff or any liquid simulation, just with deformers and noise patterns. So here we have a principal graphic of the water surface of this animation, and right at the moment it's nothing but a simple plane object with a noise pattern applied in the normals channel, overlaid by another noise, and these two guys are similar to each other because you see, it seems like if the so-called VL noise is just like the simple and plain noise, but it's mirrored in different directions. So you get a bit more sharper edges of the waves. Additionally, on top, I added for a higher amount of small details the good old water shader that is on board since ages in Cinema 4D, and which is creating these lightning or cell-like, cellular-like structures on top. Right now we are only talking about the normals channel, but we need some real deformation, and we do that with a free plugin you can find on the internet that is called Hot 4D. And this plugin is called Hot 4D because it's called the Houdini Ocean Toolset transferred to Cinema 4D. And this piece of software is just perfect for out-of-the-box ocean waves. And you can animate them and dial in several parameters, and they're really looking good. And the overall result of all of this is looking like this. Gentle waves, primary waves, secondary waves, floating above each other. So this is just cool for our underwater scene. It's not too heavy, not too nervous, just the way we like it. And let's have a brief look at the material of the water and how waves and sky are set up inside Cinema 4D. So the water is very simple. It has a very straightforward approach. Of course, you're dealing with transparency and a proper index of refraction. Everyone knows maybe for water 1.33. So that's the basis for water. We're dealing with Fresnel. Does anybody not know what Fresnel is? Fresnel is an effect that ensures a viewing angle dependency. Just imagine yourself looking perpendicular at a water surface. It's perfectly transparent, if it's clean water, of course. So, and if the sharper your viewing angle gets, the less you have transparency, the more opaque it gets, or the more reflection it gets. So you're free to choose. Either you apply the Fresnel in the transparency channel or in the reflectance channel. I think it's more or less both the same result. So we have a viewing angle dependency, of course, and we're dealing with a color channel. Of course, we can discuss, has water a color or not, but to make it sure, it's a more or less transparent material, so we can add a little help by the color channel for the correct effect. And in this case, I added a bluish color tone, and not only one blue, but also a light blue. And why is that? Because I also added Fresnel to the color channel to enhance that viewing angle dependency a bit. It's absolutely not physically correct, but it looks good. Hey, who cares? So here we go. And of course, we are dealing with the normals. That is the process I showed to you a minute ago. Here we have the two noise shaders and the water shader above that. Okay, that's the water. And water and refraction is only looking interesting if there's something to refract. And for refraction, I created a very plain and simple sky material, which is basically containing color gradients for principal colors of the horizon from ground to sky, overlaid by some radial color gradients for the depiction of a sunlight thing, something similar like a sun. And the overall result when this is applied to a sky object looks like this. Now we're talking about something interesting. We're beginning to talk about that because now there is a simple sky surrounding, refracted by waves, moving waves, and it's beginning to get interesting. So the next step is something from the fog department, you might think, but it's a very simple trick. It's blocking sight with increasing depth of the scene, you might think, but it isn't, because it's just from the side view, it's just a hemisphere with a gradient applied on the alpha channel, and this is ensuring an impression as if there was something foggy increasing with increasing depth. So it's a plain and simple trick. What you have here is one of the must-haves underwater. It's volumetric light. Light rays corresponding with the movement of the waves and depicting something foggy in the water. And this can be done with a simple light source, a parallel spot with activated volumetric visible light and area shadows. And the trick behind that is you don't need a texture to get these rays and all those details, ray-like details in the light source. You just activate a noise inside the visibility, choose some proper kind of turbulence or any other noise, and stretch it to a very unproportional amount along the z-axis. And then you get the impression of this. So this is nothing else but a noise totally stretched in that direction. Here we have something really foggy. And this is a part of the Cinema 4D object physical sky, a component of the physical sky often overseen flying under the radar. It's called the fog. And the fog can be activated in the basic tab of the physical sky, and it allows you to define some real foggy density in the scene, maybe with a starting point, with an ending point, maybe with some noise in it, animated noise maybe. But in this case, it's just a static fog from the physical sky, and it's looking quite good in combination with the volumetric light rays. Here we are. There's a slight effect you see at the waves added on top. It's, of course, depth of field. And depth of field is not only focusing the spectator's eye to the foreground or the focus point, wherever you like, but it's also underlining the foggy appearance of the whole scene. Okay, let's head over to the rock department and look what noises can do not only for water, but also for rutted rock. And the model of the rock we are traveling along with the camera in the final animation looks very complicated, but in fact it isn't. It's a very simple model, as you can see here, but the level of detail comes from subdivisions and deformations. So, of course, I needed to add subdivision to this rock geometry and added beneath it a so-called displaced deformer. And a displaced deformer is capable of containing shaders and also containing, of course, noise shaders. And we have a noise shader on board in Cinema 4D since ages that is perfect for rock structures. It's called the Naki noise, among others, of course. Luca is also perfect for landscapes or rock. But Naki is cool for, let's say, mid-level distance details of rock. And of course, you can stretch it vertically or horizontally by the shader parameters. And if you add that to a highly subdivided rock geometry, you're coming up with this. For the vertical stretched Naki, on top, the horizontally stretched Naki. And for now, that is all of the ingredients for the rock. So let's have a look at the actual material of the rock, which is also dealing with noise shaders. So let me get there. Here we are. Okay. We will just have a look at the color channel, otherwise it's a bit too much in depth. So as you can see, the color channel contains a layer shader. And the layer shader is the go-to solution in Cinema 4D for complex materials. You can go in there and stack shaders, stack bitmap textures, mix them with Photoshop-like layer modes, mask them. You can add effects like hue, saturation, lightness, whatever, transformation. And that is a real cool tool for combining different kinds of shaders and bitmaps to a more complex overall result. So what we have here are just basically noises stacked over each other, transformed in terms of hue, saturation, and lightness. And there are two more ingredients on top of that. First of all, these both guys, and then these both guys. So first of all, we are dealing here with a fall-off shader. And the fall-off shader is something like a detector where the normal gets distracted from a predefined direction. So let's assume you're defining the y-axis as the predefined detection, and fall-off is now detecting the direction. The fall-off is now detecting where the normal is distracted to a certain amount. And over this certain amount, the left side of the gradient is applied. So when you use this as a mask with layer mode, layer mask, then you can define this mossy whatever noise structure to be applied only in areas that are more or less horizontal. And where the geometry gets a bit more steep, this mossy structure gets masked out by the fall-off. Above that, we have a gradient masking a Fresnel shader. And this gradient is a 3D linear gradient that is, let's say, working through the volume of the rock. It is 3D applied. So this is masking a Fresnel effect, this one, to the more upper part of the rock. Let's have a look how this is looking in the end. So here we have the very simple looking material for the rock. For the moment, it's nothing spectacular at all, but you see the effects I described to you. Here you have the Fresnel effect masked to the upper areas of the rock. And here you have the mossy greenish thing masked to the more or less horizontal areas. Where it gets too steep, maybe here or here, the mossy effect is masked out by the fall-off. So this is for the color channel. Of course, we need some normals. There are also noises applied in here. And we need some more bump or normal information to enhance the effect. So for now, for the moment, this is the basis for the rock material. And we will add some more things to that rock, making it a bit more credible or natural. It's almost the same material, but it is masked with a fall-off to the more or less horizontal areas. And it contains, in the Luminance channel, a bitmap texture of pebbles, of small stones. And when you apply this to the base rock we see here, it looks like that. You see that? All those pebbles masked to the more or less horizontal areas by the fall-off shader. And this is just looking as if pebbles have been dropped to the rock since ages and nobody cleaned that stuff up. So let's have a word on lighting, caustics, and of course volumetric effects. Here we have our final rock structure. And right at the moment it's nice, but it's not too spectacular. And only with the final material it gets a bit more in the direction we need it. So the final word is spoken with the light. The light is finally sculpting things, making them more credible, more haptical, more tactical. So the light is the final ingredient here. It's a sunlight, an infinite light with area shadows coming directly from above. And here we have the light rays I talked to you a few moments ago. And now it comes. Here is the magic. We have now caustics appearing here on the rock. And what we have now is something that's more than each part. So we have those moving waves. We have the refraction coming from the sky. We have the volumetric light rays, and we have the caustics. And all this together is appearing as certain aspects of one and the same phenomenon. So this is quite important. And the caustics on the ground are not real caustics. Of course, you can calculate caustics in Cinema 4D, but it's taking a bit of time and render mount. So I just prepared caustics, a moving caustics texture in a caustics generator. It's freeware for Windows computers. And I shifted the channels in After Effects a bit. So you get this chromatic aberration-like style. And this is applied as a texture in the transparency channel of a dedicated light source, an infinite light, with flat projection. So it's a real cheap trick, but the result is quite okay, I think. This is another time a look at the overall light setup. Here we have a hemispherical area light coming from all sides, and we have these three guys sitting here. It's the sunlight, the volumetric light rays, and the light source for caustics. Nothing too complicated. So the next technique that is applied on this scene is something with planting, scattering, and even more lighting, of course. First of all, a look at the corals we used here. These are pre-made models, and they're looking quite nice, but not too spectacular. So we have to do something about that. First of all, we have to scatter them across the rock. And for scattering them and populating the rock with plants and corals, I just used a normal MoGraph cloner built into Cinema 4D. And I used the polygonal geometry of the rock, or polygon selection. So I painted this polygon selection, manually of course, and used that selection for populating it with all those tiny corals here at the ground, maybe functioning or looking like a submarine grass, something like that. And I repeated that step again and again for other plants, so I ended up with a highly densely populated scene like this, with all those sausage-like corals and whatever, table-like other corals and grass-like corals. So this is looking quite detailed, but the shading isn't credible at all at this moment, so we need to do something about that. First of all, I enhanced all those bitmaps coming with as a texture with the objects of the corals. The first aid I did was add a Fresnel shader to the bitmap that comes with the model. And this is creating something like a satinated look at the bright side of the objects. Something like, okay, this object is underwater for ages and it's rough and covered with some stuff. And here you have the difference between bitmap only and added Fresnel. So it's a subtle but very important step, I think, in terms of shading. So the next step in shading is adding some effect of light scattering beneath the surface of the plants. You see that especially at the yellow corals on the right side of the picture. There is something going on inside the object itself. And as I said, subsurface scattering is something that describes when light hits an object, then light is not only reflected or refracted, it's also scattered in the volume of the object. And this is happening right now here at the corals. And of course, the shader is called subsurface scattering. And the thing about subsurface scattering, you have to deal with it sometimes very carefully, especially if you're planning to populate your scene with a huge amount of those plants and subsurface scattering, because it eats up your RAM like cookies. Let's have a live look at the materials of maybe the yellow coral. Okay, here we have the Luminance Channel. And the Luminance Channel is a place to go when you want to apply subsurface scattering. You see here the shader is applied, and when you go in there, you have 4 parameters directly at your fingertips. First of all, the path length. That describes how far is the light scattered in the volume of the object before it gets sucked up and without effect. Then, of course, you have an overall strength, and you can easily overdo it above 100%. It's no problem at all. You have a general color, and you have a bitmap or shader slot here, and inside this, there's a variation shader, varying the appearance of the texture bitmap among all those render instances of my coral. I populated the scene with render instance by the MoGraph cloner. So based on this, the object mode defines how to vary this texture with a color gradient, maybe. So this is mainly the most important thing about subsurface scattering. And there are 2 more options you don't want to miss, and these are in the tab Multiple. Multiple says or gives you the option of using subsurface scattering either in cache or direct mode. And cache mode is something cool. It reuses the subsurface solution, scattering solution, from frame to frame when you're doing animation. So that's quite cool, but that's quite RAM intensive. So you have a high RAM usage, but it's looking good and it's faster than the direct solution. And be careful, you might want to build in more RAM into your machine if you use that with hundreds of plants. So just jump back to the second last presentation. So here we are. The state of the project right now is the plants with Luminance Channel on and subsurface scattering in there. And here we have something to do with bump channel or normals information. See that, especially here on the right side, this guy here. And some specular light applied. Okay, some technical facts. As I said, subsurface scattering can be very RAM consuming. This scene was rendered on 6 workstations with an overall speed of 11,000. Please ignore this null. 11,000 Cinebench points, CPU points. And each of these render workstations had 64 gigabytes of RAM, and they were used to the fullest. So this scene is a parade example for CPU-only rendering, because for GPU solution in terms of rendering, you would need a GPU with 64 gigabytes of RAM. And you should afford that as well. So it's a CPU-only solution in this case. Here, some words on some additional lights. We already talked about the sunlight, the volumetric light rays, the caustic sphere, the skylight, this hemispherical thing coming from all sides. And we have some additional lights, some bounce lights, manually placed in the scene to brighten core areas of shadows. Just look at this area here, dark black and without any light. And if I place a bounce light, maybe in this position here, an area light with area shadows going into that direction, then you brighten up these areas. Or here, the hero corals are getting a bounce light from the right side of the scene, manually placed, nothing too fancy, and with 5 to 6 of them, everything looks just a bit more smooth and indirectly lit. Even at the bottom of the rock, you see that? 1 or 2 bounce lights do a good work. It's nothing too fancy, and it's looking just better. So as a second last point of this presentation, let's have a look how the swarms of fishes are created. Thanks for the fish. So the basis of these fish swarms are, let's say, Nemo and Dory's poor relatives, because they're very low resoluted, low poly fishes coming from the 3D warehouse of Google SketchUp, I think. And the rocket science behind the swarm animation, the swarm behavior, is something from talented programmer Frank Willicke and its secret stash C4D Jack.de. And he offers a flock modifier. And the flock modifier is something you could add to your standard particle systems in Cinema 4D. We all know the standard particle systems on board since ages in Cinema 4D, sometimes highly underrated. And with things like this, the flock modifier, even the standard particle system can do a quite good and easy work for swarm animation. So let's have a look with a short live demo how this is looking. Let's look at this one here, the fish swarm yellow. And we're talking about this standard emitter of particles. And this emitter has some parameters like how high is the birth rate of particles per second in the editor, in the renderer, and so on, the lifetime of the particles. And there's also a tab of the emitter called include. And there you can put in all those modifiers for the standard particle system, like wind, gravity, turbulence, and so on, or Jack's secret stash flock modifier. And the flock modifier is taking care of the delay the particles or fishes are following a target object. It ensures the distance between the fishes, the minimum and maximum distance, and how they react to each other, how much turbulence is added there. And I already mentioned it, the control of those flocks is done by a flock target object. And this flock target object is the green cross here in the scene. With a line to spline tag, it follows along a spline. Let me just, there we are. Just a second. You see that? There is a spline. And the flock target is moving along this spline. And when we're done with the setup, the result looks just like this. See that? There's a flock target moving along the spline. All those tiny little fishes are following with a certain delay, with a certain amount of turbulence, distance to each other. And if you repeat that step for several fish swarms, it's looking like that. Yay, aquarium! So all those targets following along splines, all those swarms following the targets. and the proper camera movement applied. There we go. A deep dive with Cinema 4D. And the interesting thing is, I repeat that short animation. You see all those bounce lights placed here. You see that coming from the right side for the hero corals. I talked about that. Or maybe a few meters deeper, you see another one. Here we go. There was another one. And another one placed here. Bounce lights. So this is it. So at this point of the project, you're ready to render that heavy scene. And when you're done with that, after a couple of seconds, you're getting to do the compositing. And the compositing is about putting it all together with certain render layers, in this case plankton, and adding optical imperfections to make it look more credible. So this is the out-of-the-box render result. This is the picture just coming out of the physical render of Cinema 4D, and nothing done additionally. So this is the basis for the compositing. It's a 16-bit depth TIFF sequence, and here we have some glow effect added by a plugin for After Effects called Invisible Chainsaw Variable Diffusion. Very cool plugin, creating out-of-the-box glow in a 16-bit compositing. Some more color corrections and curves and darkening of the water in the distance. And in addition and contrast to that, a brightening up of the refractive waves on top of the image with an angel-like trapcoat star glow effect. Some vignette at the rims of the image. And something subtle. Look at the right rim of the image. You remember that effect in the original footage? It's chromatic aberration. In this case, it's done with an effect called François Tallier chromatic lens effects. It's coming from aescripts.com. Maybe 30 bucks plugin. Great. François Tallier lens effects or something like that. Great for chromatic aberrations. And grain is also added, of course. So as a last step in the compositing process, I added these particles. And these are clones from a MoGraph cloner, basically spheres with a transparent, semi-transparent material rendered or scattered in a huge sphere, and I'm traveling through it with a camera. And this render layer is added on top of this image. But the problem is, the lower half of the picture is containing much more contrast and detail, maybe confusing to the eye, than the upper part of the image. So we need the plankton coming in two flavors. One very opaque for the lower part of the picture, and one more transparent for the upper part of the picture. So here we have the plankton for the lower part, separated by a proper mask. And here we have the plankton for the upper part, also separated by a proper mask. And when you put all that together, this is the final rendering result. As you might see, some motion blur was added in post. Real Smart Motion Blur does always a good job, if it's not too complicated. So this is the final image, and let's have a look again at the animation.
Doch Wasser absorbiert Licht. Energiearmes rotes Licht wird zuerst verschluckt. Nach 200 Metern ist alles in Blau getaucht. Plankton wird knapp, das Leben schwindet. Ab einem Kilometer ist es ganz finster und unwirtlich.
So as the light disappears in the dark, this presentation is over. Thanks for watching, and happy shading and lighting. Don't forget